Well, good morning or afternoon. For the next little while, we'll be talking about Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, Aquinas, medieval philosopher, he's called St. Thomas Aquinas. So you could probably imagine that for him, good is going to have a lot to do in relationship with God. And indeed, he is Catholic, so it's going to be a Christian understanding of good. And another huge part for Aquinas in many of the medievals is law. Do you remember how when we were talking about Aristotle, in Book 10, especially the Nicomachean Ethics, he said that law was crucial to create good habits, right? And so where ultimately Aquinas is going is, he's going to make a big deal out of law. And there's three types of law. And he's following with Augustine on this. Remember, Augustine talked about city of God, city of man. Aquinas is kind of furthering that distinction. So he's going to talk about human law. He's going to talk about divine law. No, I'm sorry, natural law. And then divine or eternal law. And so basically the way it goes is, the divine is God's commands, like God's law. The natural are laws of creation, right? So this would be how the universe works, you know, the natural world, that kind of stuff. And then human laws are laws that are positive. When we say positive, though, we don't mean positive in terms of yay, plus, or good or anything. What we mean is one that is posited, and posited means to put forward. So in other words, they're just ones that human beings said, hey, this is a law. Whereas these two kinds are not positive law. These are laws that exist underneath these laws. Or above, I guess, whichever way you want to go. So that's ultimately where we're going with this whole big work. Now, I would ask, if you have not already done so, take out, or open a different window, whatever, your passages, Aquinas passages sheet, so that we can kind of look at something here. Oh, I think I'm missing one page. So we're really looking at three questions. Question 90, question 91, question 94. So if you look at the passages, look at question 90, 91, 94, 95, 96. All are about law. Question 90, the essence of law. First, he's going to tell us what law is about. 91, different types of law. That's where we get the distinction between human and eternal. On the natural law, here's the deal. The natural law is the one that motivates our actions towards good. Then 95, we talk about human law. And 96, the power of laws. And Aquinas is a little bit difficult to understand sometimes because of the method that he's using. Look, if you will, on page 463. This is where our reading starts. Just take the first one. He divides everything into questions. So, question 90, the essence of law, and I have the summary there, you can check it out. But look at in the actual text what he says. First article, does law belong to reason? He says, we thus proceed to the first inquiry. It seems that law does not belong to reason for the following reasons. Objection 1, objection 2, objection 3. Notice he uses scripture, the apostle in Romans 7:23, and then various other arguments to argue against the claim. Then, look at, he has a paragraph that says, on the contrary, it belongs to law to command, to forbid, yada, yada, yada. Then he says, I answer that. And then he gives you his explanation, and then reply to objection 1, reply to objection 2, reply to objection 3. So essentially what Aquinas is doing is, he's, with the question that he's trying to answer, he gives you the pros, the cons, and he finds a synthesis in between. And with a lot of these cons, when he says the objections, he uses all kinds of very respected works. He'll use works from Muslim thinkers, from Scripture. A lot comes from Scripture, and also from the ancient Greek philosophers, specifically Aristotle. He talks about the philosopher often. That's Aristotle. And so sometimes this can be a little bit confusing unless we're quite used to it. So my little passages summary, what I've done is I've given you the question that he's asking, and then I've just picked out important quotes from the I answer that part of Aquinas. But so the law is so important to Aquinas because, remember, first of all, we're talking about a universal Catholic Church. So at the time, right, we're talking 1200s, the Catholic Church is in charge, and Catholic, from the Greek Theologica, means essentially universal. In other words, it's a overarching church for all people. It's the one church for all, right? The one church for all people. And so then, if you're going to have one church for everybody, you're going to really need law. And in the Catholic Church, that's called canon law. But the point in general is that the Catholic Church in the medieval period was heavily interested in law for that reason. And also because law comes from reason. Okay, so the Summa Theologica is Aquinas' work. Literally, it means the sum of all theology. So this is meant to be a book that contains any question you ever need an answer. Bam, there you go. So let's start going through these questions. So let's look at question 90. Question 90 asks, does law belong to reason? Go back to Aristotle for a sec. Remember reason, emotion, appetite, the tripartite soul. Reason, right, is what allows us to see things that are laws. So reason gives us the ability to see laws. Now, when we're saying ability to see law, think for the first part about something like law of gravity. So the deal is this, right? When we say law, a law simply is a rule that is universally applicable. Universally applied. I'm just going to leave it at. So that's all law means. I mean, we tend to think of it in terms of the laws of our communities, right? Or the laws of our state or country or something. But remember, laws of science like this one are also rules with universal applicability, right? So gravity is universally applicable, right? Now, it takes reason to discover gravity. So, if you recall from your math, right, it was Isaac Newton who first sort of coined the phrase and thought about gravity in terms of mathematical understanding. Until he came along, though, there was gravity in the world, right? In other words, the law was already there. It's just that we hadn't discovered it yet because our human reason hadn't gotten us yet to the concept of gravity. So before Newton, things still did fall toward the earth. Gravity was there. It's just that we hadn't discovered it, right? In fact, discover, if you look at this word, right, what does it mean? A scientific discovery. You're discovering, which means you're simply removing the covering from something that already is there. So in other words, science doesn't invent things. Science uncovers stuff that's already been there. So gravity had been there for a long time. We uncovered it, and we now understand that one of the laws of the universe is gravity. Gravity is universal and applicable, and that's what keeps the universe together. Okay, so is law from reason? You bet. It takes a rational creature to be able to even understand or recognize laws, which is why, beavers might be able to, use what we would call scientific understanding to build their dams and mortar their dams and set up domes. They build domes. That takes a lot of mathematical laws of architecture and stuff. But beavers don't understand any of that stuff. They live it, they do it, but they don't understand the law nature of it. They don't understand it. They're just driven to do it. Human beings, because we have reason, we don't just act in the world. We act with reason in the world. Therefore, we understand laws. Okay, after we look at 90, a couple of important points. So one, we could say that law is rational, right? Okay. Then in number 2, he says, is law ordained for the common good? Yes, it is for the common good. We can really cut to the chase on these. Okay. But do go back and check it out yourself, because you don't want to just take my word for it, nor do you want to just assume that Aquinas is right. Make sure you follow his logic to see if you agree with him. And then 3, he says, is any person's reason competent to make laws? Here's the quote. Ordaining things for the common good belongs either to the whole people or to persons acting in the name of the whole. So, either the whole people or its reps. Whole or reps. Now remember, a king can be a representative of the people, right? Ordain law. Why? Well, because if law is rational and it's for the common good, then somehow the whole has to be included. The third reply, though, was significant to mention. He says, the individual is a part of a household, the household of the community, and law is for the community. Hence, we are all part of a larger whole. So it's like, here's the individual, right? But the individual is part of a family, right? But then the family is part of a community. And then ultimately the way it goes is that the community is part of God's universe. So, in other words, God's universal laws, right? The way that God created the universe extends into all of these fields, because God's laws are everywhere. So that's kind of the logic behind all of this stuff. And so after we look at 90, we've laid the groundwork for how to conceive of these laws. And they're all interconnected, all these different levels. And ultimately, the whole universe comes from God. So that's kind of where we're going. In 91, there are different kinds of laws. And they are the eternal and the natural. And that's the big thing here. The eternal laws are God's laws that are used to understand. God's laws are basically God himself, is what it boils down to. The natural laws are the laws of creation. In other words, God created the universe in such a way that it functions by various principles, and that's what is natural. Is there natural law in us? He asks in number 2. Divine law rules and measures everything subject to God's providence, and so everything evidently shares in some way in the eternal law, insofar as all things have inclinations. So our inclinations, we are inclined by nature toward God's eternal laws. That's where he's going. And do we have a divine law? Yes, we have a divine law, because the divine law allows us to understand God's hope for us of eternal salvation. And we need to hold on to that one. I've got to end this and come back in a part 2. Check it out on page 468.